All right, let's jump right in. We're going to break down freedom of expression in Hong Kong constitutional law, focusing on the key concepts you absolutely need to know to nail your exam on this topic.
So, this is it. This is the big question. Any exam problem you get is going to boil down to this. See, it's not about whether speech is totally unlimited. It never is. It's about figuring out where, and more importantly, how, the government can legally draw that line.
Here's our game plan. Think of this as the exact structure you should follow in an exam answer. First, we establish the right. Second, we pull out our main analytical tool, the proportionality test. Third, we see how context changes everything. And finally, we look at the huge exception, the national security law.
First things first. Before you can even start talking about restricting a right, you have to establish just how important that right is. And when it comes to freedom of expression in Hong Kong, the courts have been crystal clear. This isn't just another right on the list, it's fundamental.
You've got to pay attention to the language the Court of Final Appeal uses here. Words like cardinal importance and phrases like narrowly interpreted, that's legal code. It's the court signaling to the government, hey, if you're going to limit this right, you better have a really good reason, because we are going to be looking at it under a microscope.
So, what even is expression? For your exam, the answer is simple. Pretty much anything that communicates an idea. We're talking political protest for sure, but also art, advertising, academic writing, you name it. The courts cast a very, very wide net here.
Now, this right is double protected. It's in the Basic Law and it's in the Bill of Rights Ordinance. This makes it a parallel right. Remember that term, write it down, because as we're about to see, the fact that it's a parallel right has a huge impact on how courts test any law that tries to limit it.
Okay, let's get to your secret weapon for exams. This is the single most important framework you need to know, the proportionality test. Anytime the government restricts a right, this is the legal test the courts use to figure out if that restriction is actually constitutional.
This flowchart right here, this is your best friend for revision. It lays out the whole process. Now, before the main test, the court asks a quick question. Is the limit prescribed by law? Basically, is it a clear, accessible law? If the answer is yes, then we get into the main event.
And here they are, the 4 steps you have to know, inside and out. 1. Does the government have a legitimate reason, a legitimate aim? 2. Is there a rational connection between the law and that reason? 3. Does the law go no more than necessary to achieve its goal? And finally, 4. Does it strike a fair balance between what society gains and what the individual loses?
And boom! Here's where that parallel right thing we mentioned comes back to bite. Remember step 1, legitimate aim? Because the right is also in the Bill of Rights, the government can't just make up any old reason. Its aim must come from a very short specific list found in an international treaty. We're talking things like protecting national security, public order, or the rights of others. That's it.
Okay, that's the theory. Sounds pretty neat, right? But how does this all work when it's applied to a messy, real-world situation? Well, it turns out the proportionality test isn't just an abstract formula. Its application depends heavily on the specific context. Okay, listen up, because this is probably one of the most important ideas you need to grasp. It's the difference between mode and substance. Think of it as the how versus the what. Is the law stopping what you can say, the message itself, or is it just stopping how you say it, the physical act you use to express it?
And this quote right here from the Chief Justice shows exactly how the court used that distinction. He's saying, look, the law against desecrating a flag doesn't stop you from criticizing the government. You can still write an article, give a speech, whatever. It just bans one specific way, one mode of doing it. This is key. Courts are way more willing to say a restriction on the mode is okay compared to a restriction on the substance.
To really get the Hong Kong approach, it's super helpful to put it side by side with the United States, where the courts looked at the exact same issue, flag burning, and came to the complete opposite conclusion.
See, the U.S. Supreme Court looked at banning flag burning and said, whoa, hold on. This isn't about the mode. This is about the government trying to control the substance. You're trying to force people to respect the flag. They saw it as the government trying to enforce one official opinion, which is a big no-no in their system. This contrast really makes the Hong Kong mode versus substance idea pop.
Now, context isn't just about how you say something. It's also about where you say it. On public property, say inside the Legislative Council, your speech can be limited for reasons of order and decorum. But, and this is important, that limit still has to pass the whole 4-step proportionality test. But on private property, it's a different story. Your right to protest on someone's lawn pretty much ends where their property rights begin.
And now,
we get to the thing that changes the entire legal landscape. The National Security Law, or NSL, doesn't just tweak the rules, it creates an entirely different legal reality for certain kinds of speech.
This single screenshot tells you almost everything you need to know. In the very first major trial under the NSL, you can search the entire judgment for the word proportionality, the test we've spent all this time on, and it's just not there. Not once. That's a huge tell.
So here's the bottom line for your exam. Under the NSL, that whole balancing act of rights versus restrictions that the proportionality test does, it's just not applied. The entire framework shifts from balancing individual rights against the public good to a framework that prioritizes state security. It's a fundamental change in the court's job.
So instead of a balancing test, the court's job becomes asking a more straightforward, factual question. For a charge like incitement, the question isn't, is this ban a proportional limit on speech? It's simply, were these words capable of inciting secession? All of a sudden, the focus snaps right back to the substance, the message itself. Certain ideas are just off-limits, no matter how you express them.
And cases like this one really show the new reality in action. Ma Chun-mun was sentenced for chanting slogans. The legal fight was over the meaning of those slogans and his intent, not a complex proportionality analysis about whether banning the chanting was a justified limit on his freedom of expression.
Okay, let's wrap this up. Here is your exam checklist. 1. Always start by saying expression is a cardinal right. 2. You must know the 4-step proportionality test cold for any non-NSL problem. 3. Always distinguish between mode and substance. 4. Don't forget that location matters. And 5, the big one. Understand that the NSL is a massive exception where that entire proportionality framework just doesn't apply.
And that really leaves us with the big question mark hanging over everything. We've basically got two different legal universes operating side by side now, the traditional proportionality-based one and the new one under the NSL. How the courts manage the border between those two universes, well, that's going to define the future of this cardinal right in Hong Kong.